Hello, everyone. I am Genesis Maldonado, and I'm sitting here with the esteemed Dr. Jex. He is a professor emeritus and an author. He's co-authoring a forthcoming book titled Chronic Illness in the Workplace: Theory, Research, and Implications for Organizations with Dr. Kenzie Dye. A subtle plug right here. The book is being published by Oxford University Press and will likely be released in spring of 2027. I just wanted to put that out there for anyone curious. So, Dr. Jex, how are you feeling today?
Doing really well, thank you, Genesis. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. So today, I know we're going to be talking about retirement.
Right.
And this is a hot topic for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of family members currently asking me about retirement, like, when is it a good time? Is there a good time? You know, early retirement, late retirement? I'm sure you've encountered a bunch of questions with this too, right?
Yeah, it's, in retirement, just to give you some background on, research on retirement, it's a field that, it's an area that IO psychologists have not been really doing research on it that long. I think it's a topic that has been studied probably more so by developmental psychologists, people who study aging, aging issues, also people who study economics.
Really?
So yeah, it's a pretty, I would say it's a pretty eclectic group of people who study retirement. But within our field of biopsychology, it hasn't been, it's not a topic that's been studied a long time. But the one other thing about retirement before we go on, it's a very individual thing. I think it's different for every person. How they decide whether to retire, how they decide what form.
It's a very personal decision.
Yeah, exactly. What form retirement will take, and also the factors that kind of shape that retirement decision.
Yes. So the questions that I've kind of compiled today, they come from a lot of sources. Some are personal, some are from Reddit. So if any of you guys, see this online, we're trying to get the questions that you guys want to hear. So to start off, this one I believe I saw on Reddit. It says, I've seen people ask online, in very simple terms, how do you know it's actually time to retire? And I think the question is so compelling because it sounds like a financial question, but it's also clearly a life question.
Yeah, and it's let me just address the financial part because I think for a lot of people that decision is largely a financial decision. When do you have enough money in order to replace your income? And obviously we're not going to give, I wouldn't give anybody financial advice or anything like that. But I think for a lot of people, it is a financial decision because people don't want to outlive their money. But I think for a lot of people, the decision really is, it largely is based on, whether they've, kind of how they feel about work, if they're tired of working. There's some jobs that people almost have to retire from because of the physical demands. So it can have a lot to do with the nature of the work that people do, and it also can have a lot to do with what people are retiring to. And what I mean by that is, what are some of the things that they're planning to do after they retire? Their leisure pursuits, hobbies. Some people want to travel. Things like that. So it's a very complex set of factors, but of course, finances, that's certainly a big part of it.
Finances does sound like a big part, but from what I'm hearing in your experience, have you seen people who typically are maybe burnt out from work or don't like what they're doing? You see those people retire more?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think there's some terminology. I mean, it's not really technical terminology, obviously, but in the retirement research, the terms that are sometimes used are push and pull factors. Pull factors would be things that are sort of drawing you into retirement. So you have the desire to travel more, pursue a hobby that you haven't had time to. But push factors are things like, you're working too many hours, you're burnt out from what you're doing, you have a lot of interpersonal conflict at work, things like that. Those would be things kind of pushing you out. And, and generally, I kind of forgot the question, but I'll try and address it. But I think generally it's a lot healthier if you're retiring based on pull factors as opposed to push factors. I mean, for a lot of people, it's both.
Mm-hmm.
But those are factors. But yeah, the short answer is yes, people do retire just, because they're burnt out from work. And the other, and I'll give a plug to my old, well, not old friend, but he's still my friend, Terry Bair, who's Terry was one of the first IO psychologists who did research on retirement. And he did a study. I don't remember exactly what year it came out, but he included a variable that just asked people if they're tired of work. Very generic type of item. And that was a strong predictor of people's decision to retire. People it's not really specific, but they're just basically tired of working. They've worked for 35, 40 years and they're just tired of work.
And in your professional opinion, do you feel like that's a good enough reason if you're just tired of work, burnt out, don't like your situation? Is it a good enough reason to justify being able to retire? Or if you're still able to, do you think it would be better for some people, of course, not all situations, but some people to maybe just find a different job?
Yeah, and it's, and again, I keep going back to the idea that it's very individualized, but yeah, sure. I mean, I think that's I don't think there's one I don't think there's a right or wrong reason to retire. And I think it is, it definitely, I think it's a legitimate reason to retire. And keep in mind that when you retire, I mean, you can certainly, we may get into this later, but you can certainly go back to work after you retire, or you can work part-time. Mm-hmm. So it isn't, in some respects, it's not really an irrevocable decision. That's the one thing to really keep in mind. But yeah, for a lot of, for some people, they're just kind of burnt out from what they're doing, and they just need a break from the demands of their job.
So, as an IO psychologist, you're very esteemed in your career. As an aspiring IO psychologist, what do you think makes the decision feel so psychological when it comes to retiring?
Well, first of all, thank you for calling me esteemed. I mean, I think really what makes it psychological, and I know this because I've gone through it, and maybe you'll ask me more about my own retirement. But
absolutely,
yeah. But I think what makes it psychological is that people's identity is wrapped up in work. Okay,
right.
In the jobs that they do, in their career, their identity. Their routines and things like that. But I think it's more so the identity. People think of themselves as a professor or as an engineer or as an accountant. So that's kind of what makes it a very sort of psychological experience. And when you retire, you're sort of, not always, but a lot of times you're giving up that identity. You're leaving that identity in the past. And so I think for so many people, that's what makes it hard. I'm not saying the financial part's easy, because if you look at statistics, a lot of people do not save enough for retirement. A lot of people are way behind. But I think it's the identity piece of it, what work means to people, how it contributes to people's, how they structure their day and things like that. So I think but the big thing is like your identity. So, work and your occupation being part of your psychological identity.
Especially and this is very personal, but I've also noticed that in the US, even when we introduce ourselves, we say, "Hi, I'm Genesis, I'm a student."
Right.
"Hi, I'm Bob and I work in this," So I do, even in a day-to-day basis, see that attachment. And whenever you retire, you're like, "Hi, I'm Joe. I'm retired."
Right.
And to some people, that is heavier than for other people to say, "I'm retired." It takes on a certain meaning sometimes. And I think maybe that also creates that psychological, like exactly how you were saying, that psychological attachment of like, well, I'm not what I was for 30 years plus anymore. So who am I?
Yeah, and one of the things too is I was reading I don't know who they quoted in the article, but I was reading, it was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how a lot of times when people retire, one of the problems that they have is they basically feel like they don't matter anymore, if that makes any sense, that they're, like work gives you something that you're considered valued and important and that sort of thing. I mean, like what you're saying is certainly true. I've gone through that. I'm retired, and of course people congratulate you, and I'm like, why are you congratulating for that? But I think feeling relevant I think
Yeah.
is, work gives you that, the feeling of relevance, feeling like you're doing something. And we may get to it later, but there's certainly other ways you can feel that way other than work, but you have to, but it's a transition.
Yes. It's
Yeah.
a big transition.
Right.
And speaking about transitions, we just spoke about a lot of little things that we're going to dive in much
Yeah.
deeper throughout the podcast. So I'm going to go ahead and transition to our next question. For someone trying to decide whether to retire this year or work 1 or 2 more years,
Right.
it's a big decision. A lot of people, they say next year.
Right.
Work just got a little bit too busy. Like I just got promoted, or maybe something's going on in life right now. Next year. What are some of the most practical questions they should be asking themselves before making the huge retirement decision?
I would say, going back to the financial, part, obviously they have to have the financial resources. If you don't have the financial resources, then it's obviously you either can't retire or you have to really, really change your lifestyle quite a bit. Okay, so the financial resources are one. And the other, I would say the other big thing, and we kind of alluded to this earlier, what is it you're retiring to? Okay, so do you have hobbies? Do you want to travel? Do you, and things like that. What are you going to do with your time once you retire? And I think a lot of people, including myself, probably don't really think about that piece of the that part of the equation probably nearly enough.
Actually, another personal tidbit. I was talking to my grandpa actually right before this podcast, and I was asking him what made you retire. He was an accountant for years. And how did you know how to manage your time after you retire?
Right.
You go from like a normal person going 8 hours a day, occupied, coming home, making dinner and going to sleep,
Right.
that routine, to all of a sudden I can wake up at midday if I want to. I can go to sleep at 3 a.m. if I want to. Almost, I feel like maybe you can elaborate some on this. Like those first couple months of retirement are great, right?
Right.
And then maybe reality starts to hit more of like, wow, what can I do now?
Yeah, and I think there is some research. You hit on something kind of interesting there. There is research that suggests it's sort of like unemployment in a sense, that there is sort of a honeymoon period when you first retire. You don't have any responsibilities. You, like you said, you can get up whenever you want. Your day's unstructured. But that gets old after, for some people that gets old pretty quickly, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do. And I think that, and again, this is, from the research and also from personal experience, having a plan of what you're going to do, how you're going to structure your time. And again, it's a very, I keep emphasizing it, but it's a very individual thing. I know people that, have fully retired and just like, I don't know, walking around their house, doing little chores and stuff like that. For me, that wouldn't be something I'd want to do. But I think having a plan of what you're going to do after you retire is definitely something that's very important to go into retirement with, as opposed to just kind of figuring it. And a lot of people, I think, do that. They just kind of figure that out.
They wing it.
Right. When they go, they get the financial part down, but then they kind of wing the other parts of it, like what they're going to do, their social life and things like that. And the social life is very important too, having people around, having friendships and things like that.
Yes. And that's actually a great point, because I want to talk about things that people tend to overlook, right? People tend to overlook not having that structure and not having a plan, right? And something you just said was so important, where it's the social aspect too. People think that, and I'm going on a limb here, but I think generally people tend to think like, oh, I'm going to have so much free time, now I can begin my social life. But then maybe tend to ignore the fact that their friends are still working.
Right.
And
Right.
maybe their friends are not retired yet, and they're catching up to them, but it's not the same anymore. It's a different relationship maybe.
Yeah.
So can we talk about a little bit more about that social aspect? How can we really help someone with some advice on struggling with that?
Well, first of all, one of the problems for a lot of people is the fact that a lot of their social relationships revolve around work, or are cultivated in the workplace. So when you retire, you're kind of, you still have access to those people, but it's really not the same thing when you're not working for them. So that's the one thing. And I think it's important to, for people to intentionally cultivate social relationships. I'm not one who's probably done a very good job of doing that. But
also, Dr. Jex is one of the most popular people I know on the UCF campus. Very humble.
Okay, I'll take that as a compliment, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think cultivating social relationships is pretty important. We did it. One of my graduate students, one of my last doctoral students, Yen Choi, her dissertation was looking at well-being trajectories among people who retire. And one of the things that really stuck out to me in her findings was that one of the things that predicts the strongest predictor of people maintaining a positive well-being trajectory. So what I mean by that is if they're happy before retirement, they stay happy after. Okay, they continue. Is availability of social relationships. The social part of it is very important. But there's ways that people can do that. Joining clubs, volunteering is a big thing for people to get to know other people. I mean, there's here at UCF. There's an organization called Life at UCF where that's for retirees. They have monthly meetings and things like that. But the social, I think there's a lot of research to support that as the social part.
Yeah.
But the problem is, like I alluded to earlier, is that work for a lot of people, work is the source of that the social relationships that they have.
So a very successful retirement, an aspect, better said, of a successful retirement, you would say, was putting yourself out there. Then a lot of people, I am shy, I am shy. So they say, well, I already have my friends.
Right.
And they don't want to go join the clubs, but it's important. It's important to go join the clubs and put yourself out there and prolong your life even more, have a life after retirement.
Right.
So then that segues me to my next question. One thing that seems very important here is whether someone is retiring towards a meaningful life or just from a stressful one, kind of how we talked about at the very beginning. Are you running away from your job and burnout into a meaningful one, or are we continuing that and just kind of fizzing out?
Yeah, and I talked about earlier the push and pull factors. I mean, sometimes, for some people, they retire for both reasons. They may be burnt out, plus they've sort of cultivated a life outside of work. But sometimes people don't cultivate that life outside of work. I mean, one of the consequences of having demanding work and burnout is that you don't have time to cultivate a life outside of work. And so for those people, it's pretty difficult because you retire and you really don't have, you haven't developed interests outside of work and things in relationships outside of work to retire to. So that can be really difficult, but it is important to, and again, I'm not trying to say there's anything wrong with retiring because you're burnt out, because people do, but it's also important to have sort of some pull, in the non-work sphere, something you're going toward.
We're getting that push. We need a pull.
Right. And for some people, that's their kids or grandkids. For some people, it's hobbies. I mean, it's really different. It's really different for each person, but there really does need to be something that you're moving toward. I really think people should keep kind of moving forward. And that's kind of an aspect of that, is when you retire, kind of moving to something meaningful in your life besides work. But it is hard because for so many people, and for so many years, work is the most meaningful thing that they're involved in.
Right. So what's the difference between being done with work and being ready for retirement?
I would say, I think done with work is more, I would look at that as more, and this is really my opinion, more job specific. You're done with a particular job. And I think a person that's in that situation may want to rethink retiring and maybe look at getting another job. But being ready for retirement, I look at that as more, you've kind of accomplished what you want to accomplish. You've had a good career, you're just ready to move on to other things. And so I think the first one is probably more of a negative motivation, whereas the second one is more positive. You can put your career into perspective, your legacy, and that sort of thing, and then move to something more, move to something rewarding and enjoyable outside of the workplace.
Fair. Retirement can sound great in theory, but daily life is where reality starts hitting, kind of how we were talking about earlier.
Right.
So what does a realistic test drive or retirement look like before someone officially leaves work? Can they even test drive? Can we pretend
Test drive.
vacation and pretend to be retired?
Well, okay, I can tell you what I did. Well, before I tell you what I did, I want to say one thing. In social psychology, there's a lot of evidence that people a lot of times are not good at forecasting how they're going to respond to things like relationship breakups and things like that. Daniel Gilbert has done work on that, on affective forecasting. A lot of times people think things are going to be better or worse than they actually, in reality, they are. So a lot of times people aren't very good at forecasting how they're going to respond to things. So to your question, though, there's, in a lot of organizations, and I did it myself, there's one thing you can do is phased retirement programs. So what I did was I started my process of retiring 2 years before I actually retired. So the first year I cut down to 75%, and then the second year, the year before I retired, I cut down to, the year I actually retired, I cut down to 50%. So you kind of phase out. Now, the one thing I would say is about phased retirement, and again, it's, it can be really good. For me personally, I don't know that it worked real well because I just never figured out how to work 75%.
Really?
Yeah, I was not very good at, being 75%.
Well, we're going to talk about your retirement now.
Yeah,
here in
I know
a second,
you're gonna roast me on that one pretty soon. But
no spoilers yet.
But the downside to phased retirement is that your pay goes down, by 25% and then by 50%. But I think a lot of people they only know how to go one speed, and that was kind of in my case that was definitely an issue with phased retirement. But that can certainly be good, or sabbaticals. Some organizations, will allow people to take sabbaticals and kind of experience what life is like.
Explain to me as a younger person.
Sure.
What is a sabbatical?
It's kind of a break from work. I mean, in the academic world, a sabbatical is something where you work on something. Yeah, you work on something. A lot of times people will work on a book. They might teach at another university. They might do something else. They might acquire another skill or something like that. But it's basically I took a sabbat when I was at Bowling Green. I only took one sabbatical my whole career. It just didn't work out for me to take too many. But I worked for Centers for Disease Control. I worked at one of the CDC labs.
Wow.
In Cincinnati. So it can be a chance to just do something different. But in some non-academic organizations, they offer the opportunity for sabbaticals to just take an extended period of time off, like 3 months or something like that. Sometimes it's paid, sometimes it's not. But that can be. But I think what you're suggesting, I think that's a really good thing to do. Kind of test drive, see how you're gonna respond to it. Because again, I think people a lot of times in theory. I mean, I think about these people your age that. I may get the acronym wrong, but I don't think it's too far off. FIRE, F-I-R-E, financial independent, retire early.
Yes.
I think, yes. Yeah, and I think, and hey, hats off to people who want to do that. But I think what a lot of people who want to do that don't realize is they maybe don't realize what they don't really realize what their life is going to be like when they're retired at 42, and they got 50 years left, or 50 or maybe 45 to 50 years left without work. And I don't think they plan that part of it out.
Yeah, and just how you were talking about, it's hard for us humans to think so far ahead.
Right.
Especially.
Yeah.
And especially when you're young, you're
right.
Still even a little bit harder than that. But just to kind of summarize, because I do think those are very good points and practical things people can do so people can phase out of their job.
Sure.
Taking incremental steps back, which
Right.
is great, and then take a sabbatical.
I mean, sabbatical is usually associated with the academic world, but there's some non-academic organizations that also offer them. So taking kind of extended leave
Sabbatical.
and sort of trying things, kind of like you said, a test drive. So that's always I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that brings us to something I think is also very big for a lot of people, especially those who have spent decades building a career. If someone's identity is deeply tied to work, just how we were talking about before,
Right.
what practical steps can they take before retiring so they don't feel lost afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who kind of grappled with that myself, I mean, obviously, the short answer is try to develop another identity, and try to develop interests in your personal life that also shape your identity. So I'll give you an example for me. When my kids were growing up, I was very involved in their sports. I coached, but both of my sons played baseball. My older son played in college, and I was very involved in coaching. I was also, I also was the commissioner of one of the leagues, and when I lived in Bowling Green. So I would say for me, that was something that kind of gave me something to do and some identity outside of being a professor, because I dealt with a lot of people who weren't,
Mhm.
professors
Mhm.
in that role. And so developing developing an identity outside of the workplace, something that
Prior
you
to
yeah,
retirement.
prior
Yes.
to retirement. And again, I think not people don't always do that, but I think that's a good way to to ease the transition into retirement.
Right. Going back to again that earlier part where, hi, I'm Genesis. I'm a student.
Right.
That's my occupation for right now, but
Yeah.
I'm also a hobbyist, or I'm also
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
all these other things. I'm not just a student.
Right.
So we people can practically go ahead, and I would venture to say probably years prior, don't just the year you think of retirement and start a new hobby, and then this new thing is going to be your new identity, right?
I think it's a process that starts along. I think it starts way before you retire.
Right.
Developing interests outside of work, and hobbies, activities. Some people belong to. They get involved in their communities. There's a lot of ways you can do that, but if you put all your eggs in one basket, as far as work, it can be those are the people that usually have the hardest time with retirement. But one thing I would say, I want to add here too, I'm sounding pretty negative, but the one thing I did learn from Terry Bear, and we used to work together, and I remember him talking about retirement. The vast majority of people do enjoy retirement. I think the research suggests, despite all the caveats that we're going through here,
Yes.
most people do enjoy being retired. They find it enjoyable, fulfilling. So I would say, generally speaking, a lot of people do get it right. I mean, there's definitely, there are definitely people who don't, who struggle with it, but a lot of people do get it right and enjoy being retired and so on.
Yeah, so it's okay. Everyone is scared of the unknown, no matter
Sure.
who you are. You're always scared of the unknown. So it's natural for such a decision to be a little bit intimidating.
Sure.
But it's okay, right? It's
Mhm.
okay. Like most people are okay.
Yeah,
after
they are.
retirement.
Yeah, they are.
So that kind of also leads me to my next question, which is, what are there warning signs that someone is financially ready but not psychologically ready?
Wow. I would say the financial one is hard to pin down, because the thing I would say about that is that, and again, I'm not a financial planner and,
Right.
and don't even play one on TV. But the financial one is really hard to pin down, because there's so many unknowns in retirement, as far as like your lifestyle, the lifestyle you want, and the big wild card really is health. You may need, unfortunately, as we get older, a lot of times we have more health problems.
Mhm.
And there's more health related expenses, and as people get into later years, a lot of times they might need long term care, and that's very, very expensive.
Mhm.
So, but but given that, even the unknowns with that, a lot of times people, they feel pretty financially ready. But the other part of it, though, I think that, and this is going to sound kind of simple, but I think the other thing, the non-financial part, is if you still really enjoy work,
Mhm.
that's probably a sign that you're not ready. If you just really still enjoy what you're doing, if you're doing it well, if you enjoy the people you work with, if work is still fulfilling and you enjoy it, I would say don't retire. Nowadays, you don't have to. There's no mandatory retirement except in maybe a handful of occupations. But I would say if people are still enjoying what they're doing, it's fulfilling, I would say don't retire, even if you're financial. A lot of people feel like they have to when they're financially ready, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
That is a great point. I'm going to go ahead and let the cat out of the bag. How's your retirement going, Dr. Jex?
My retirement? Okay, so I'll tell you, I retired in May of 2024, and I mean, there's some things about it I like a lot. I mean, I have a lot of flexibility over my time, which is nice. But I mean, in some ways, I never really did retire. I kept coming into my office, and now I don't. Now I had my office taken away, unfortunately. But that's another podcast. But we're very space poor in our department. But I've enjoyed it a lot in some ways. I mean, I would say the downside, kind of feeling like you're still engaged, relevant, that sort of thing. That's been a hard adjustment, I think, from what I was doing. I mean, I was directing a doctoral program and doing some other, doing a lot of things professionally and publishing, and I'm still publishing. But
yes, don't forget the book.
But yeah, I mean, but I would say there's been some good and bad. I mean, things that are very good about it, and things that are harder adjustments. But right now, life is pretty good. I mean, I do my lab is great. I work with some really good undergraduate students, including yourself, and so I have I have a lot of positive things in my professional life, and I kind of do it at a pace that that I want to do it at.
You went from doing a whole lot in your doctoral program to kind of still doing a lot in your retirement, but now being able to better pick and choose what you actually want. Right? Not that you didn't want to do your doctoral before, right? Mm-hmm. But you just get a little bit more customization.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it right. Kind of hit the nail on the head there. And it's not that everything I was doing prior to retirement was, there were things that I didn't want, everything I didn't want to do. But I think, like you said, you can pick and choose a little bit more. You spend more time doing the things that you really want to do. And don't do the things, I don't know if that sounds grammatically correct, but and you don't do the things that you really don't enjoy doing. Right. So that's so it's kind of in some ways, and again, this may be more specific to academia, I think. I mean, I think that we're a little unusual in some respects, but it kind of allows you to do that, work on things. I like to write. I like to work with students. I like to do research. So I can do those things, but I don't have to, do administrative work, which isn't totally bad, but it's, it's things that overall it's probably not things that I was quite as excited about, but I do things, but yeah, pick and choose things that really I'm interested in doing.
In broader terms, you can even say it's almost like a partial retirement. Yeah. Because, you're still doing the things that you want to do, right? Mm-hmm. And that's also okay for others to do the same way,
Sure.
And other occupations too. I mean, you get to, let's say, I don't know, you're an accountant, and you get to discard some of the stuff that you don't want to do every day, like maybe some phone calls or some miscellaneous, tedious things, but you get to focus on the fun parts of, in this case, accounting, whatever that may be.
Well, and one of my last students. This is actually kind of makes me think of one of the last students that I worked with at Bowling Green, Yixing Peng. His dissertation was on factors that impact whether nurses come back and work part-time after they retire. Well, it was actually their intentions to do that, and one of the big predictors of that was actually it's a variable called generativity motivation, and basically what that is really willingness to help younger nurses. So serving in mentoring roles and things like that. So it kind of allows you to do things like that maybe you couldn't do as much of when when you were a full-time employee because of just the reward structure and everything. But it kind of allows you to do a little more of those things that you really find rewarding. But that was one of the main things that predicted their plans to come back and work after retirement.
Right. So to bring this all together, I want to end this on a very practical note. If you would give one piece of advice, to someone who is approaching retirement and feeling uncertain, what would you want them to remember from all this?
Oh boy. I would say certainly talking to your, if you're married, talking to your spouse or partner about it, and having them be honest with you about, how they see you in terms of how people sort of define themselves by work, having them give you an honest assessment of how important work is to you. Because I think culturally, I think people feel funny about admitting that work is very important to them. They want to be balanced, and that's good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being balanced, but I think people there's kind of I don't know. It seems like people don't want to admit that they're pretty work focused, and having somebody give you kind of a realistic assessment of how important work is to you, if they can see you retired and that sort of thing. So I think getting an honest assessment, and like we talked about earlier, if you can do some kind of tryout, I think that's really good.
Yes.
To try it out and to kind of see how you respond to a lack of structure and that sort of thing. And you can create structure for yourself too, but work is the thing that really is the main driver of structure for most people.
Right.
So, but sort of doing that tryout and getting a realistic opinion from somebody that knows, somebody who knows you well, I think is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. This is all really insightful. I know this is going to help so many people out there who are struggling with retirement and the big decision. Thank you so much for being on this podcast with me. It was a pleasure. And are there any other last words you want to say, Dr. Dix?
No, just I enjoyed it too. It's a really, and I think I guess the last thing I would say too. I mean, if you look at the demographics now, this is an issue that's really going to be it's really important for a lot of people now. Having the making that decision and kind of navigating retirement. So it's a very important issue right now. And so I enjoyed talking to you. Really great questions, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Everyone have a great day, and I hope to see you back for our next podcast.
All right.